So first things first, I want to thank a YouTuber by the name of Moorish and Struggle for the kind attention he's given to this channel. I don't know how many of you are subscribed to him, but to those who aren't, you really should. It's a good channel. Um, so this is going to be sort of a series that I'm going to be working on this channel, wherein I'm going to be exploring, ruminating, expounding upon what I think constitute the philosophical and theological foundations of Christianity at its core, insofar as it can be distinguished not really so much from other religions, but from other fundamental ways of viewing the world as a whole. And what I'm hoping to be able to argue successfully is that the philosophical, ontological, metaphysical, theological, and anthropological, what it means to be human, foundations upon which Christianity alone is built and structured, really presents a worldview that I think is unparalleled as to its fundamental coherence, rational consistency, philosophical soundness, and intuitional plausibility. Since I believe religion, and really any more or less coherent system of thought or looking at the world, is most interestingly and insightfully understood through the prism of its first principles. This video and the next few will be focused on Christianity as to those first principles, which will really seldom appeal to Scripture at all. Within this segment, I'll discuss what I think are the most essential first principles that undergird traditional Christianity as more or less couched in its ancient and pre-modern context, which I think, especially as a Catholic, is the best way really to understand it in its authenticity. Now, to those who might accuse me of a no true Scotsman fallacy, I'll just respond by saying I'm not really interested in any conception of Christianity that fundamentally differs from its essence as couched in its ancient and pre-modern context, since I really think it's this version of Christianity alone that exhibits the qualities of coherence, soundness, consistency, intuitional plausibility, etc., the reason for which will be explored throughout the series. So how is the series really going to be structured? Well, first I'm going to lay out and expound upon the first, most basic metaphysical and ontological principles that I think serve as Christianity's most ultimate ground. Second, I'll discuss natural theology, that is, God as understood by reason alone, which serves as the basis for Christian revealed theology. Third, I'll give an analysis of Christianity's understanding of man in relation to the cosmos, based upon the first principles I referred to. Fourth, I'll discuss that in relation to Christianity's unique insistence upon the incarnation, and how this doctrine really, I think, contains the heart, essence, and soul of Christianity, and flows rather fittingly from the principles previously discussed. And fifth, I'll discuss how Christianity's unique notion of the whole of time as directed to a final end ties into both the incarnation and man's relation to it, derived still from those first principles. Throughout all of these segments, I'll be defending the coherence, soundness, consistency, and intuitional plausibility of these foundations. And lastly, I'll show how these foundations, I think, serve as the best way to see our place in the world, and really the primary thing to pursue personally, socially, culturally, and even politically. So let's get the introduction out of the way. What are some of these first principles? Well, I think you can narrow it down kind of to four. First, there's Hila Morphism, which I'll define in a minute. Second, there is more or less moderated realism. Third, there's what I will call the principle of perfectible participation. That is, being as a hierarchy and participatory community. Fourth, there's the notion that being is fundamentally teleological and relational, which I'll define. So let me define some of these. And in the next video, I'll unpack these really one by one and give a more thorough defense and explanation. So let's start with the first one, Hila Morphism. Hila Morphism is derived from two Greek words, Hila and morph, and they translate into English as matter and form. Matter and form, respectively. Matter and form cannot be understood as to their colloquial definitions, though. Basically, at its core, the doctrine teaches that reality is fundamentally divided into an underlying subject, which would be referred to as matter, and the determining whatness, which is to say that whereby a thing is what it is as distinct from another thing, and this is referred to as form.
Matter must not be equated with the collectivity of physical objects, as I think is common in our colloquial understanding. And form must not be equated with a thing's shape, size, or physical limitations. These things are no doubt related. Um, to give a kind of imperfect illustrative analogy, think of many like resumes um, being printed, whereby the multiple blank sheets of paper in the copy machine would represent the matter or the underlying subject, and the actual content of the resumes, uh, which distinguish those papers as resumes, that would represent form or the determining whatness, whereby a thing is the kind of thing that it is as distinct from another kind of thing. I'll define this and defend it in the next video, but let's move on. The second first principle is moderated realism, and this is basically to say that in the world we have natures that are independent of the mind. A tree is a tree and a dog is a dog. The shared nature of treeness can be distinguished from particular instantiations of the tree, but the nature of tree is to some extent inherent in the instantiations themselves. Yet, considering the nature of treeness in and of itself, it is abstract in nature and adheres ultimately in the mind of God. Christian thinkers really kind of vary as to the degree to which this realism about natures is moderated, as earlier Christians really seem to favor a Neoplatonic realism, which is much less moderated, and later medieval Christians tend to favor a more Aristotelian account, whereby the realism is more moderated. But honestly, Christianity at its core really does generally try to avoid the hyper-exaggerated, really nutty realism of Plato that really had to be chopped down because it was not very tenable. But again, more on this in the future. So third, and this is what I'm going to call the principle of perfectible participation. And this is really to say that every being is not completely and utterly isolated as a radically sovereign entity. And so that is to say that every being, given Hila Morphism, is more or less related to a transcendental standard in which it participates. Traditionally, these standards are kind of like the following: being, truth, goodness, perfection. To the extent to which beings conform with their natures as conceived in the mind of God, they share in those things from different angles. And this really gets to our fourth principle, that is, being as teleologically relational. Now, teleology is a word that basically refers to the idea that things act for various ends beyond themselves. Even inanimate objects have inherent tendencies toward various ends. The brittleness of glass has the tendency to shatter, and I'll kind of defend that principle because I know it's been caricatured by Voltaire rather stupidly, in my opinion. In inanimate life, though, animals really do seem to kind of tend towards survival and reproduction, etc. And humans, which we'll explore a lot later, they kind of distinctively have ends attaining to, referring to attaining the truth and seeking the good. Since Christianity understands these things as one and the same with God's essence, Christianity regards man as having union with God as his primary end, since truth and goodness are ends of the rational soul, whereby man is distinctively man. As you can probably see, all of these really tie together and are inseparable from one another. In the next video, we're going to cover the first principle that I mentioned, that's Hila Morphism, and explain it and defend it, and kind of get a fuller picture of as to what I mean by the term, and why it's so essential, I think, to the foundations of Christianity. And I hope you like the series. Thanks for your time.
And thank you all who are subscribed to the channel. I really look forward to making more videos in the future. So thanks again.